Sonic, the heart of your system.
Hello, Briony here from KITGURU, and in this video I'm taking a look at the GameMax Starlight Case that I've got beside me here. It has a retail price of around £65, so it's not a super expensive case. It's definitely on the more sort of affordable side of the market, and at the moment it doesn't really look that exciting. It is like a mid-tower size case. Just looks like a big black box. It sort of has this like angular design to the front, so it isn't just square, but it definitely isn't the most exciting. However, it has got an RGB strip down the front and an RGB fan at the back, and also a big tempered glass side panel as well. So hopefully when I've got some components in here, it will sort of look light up and it will start to look a lot more attractive. I'll start off by talking about the front of the case. Obviously it's empty at the moment. It's just so it's a little bit easier for me to take a look around and show you a few things while it's not full of components and sort of get like my first impressions as well. So up top here we've got a reset button. There's also a jack for a microphone, a jack for a headphone. There's two USB 2 ports, two USB 3 ports. I'm assuming they're probably USB 3.1 Gen 1, and then there's also a button to change the LED lighting effects as well, but obviously have to wait till it's got some components in there before we can play around with that one. And then on the front of the case there is the power button. It's quite a little cute design actually. It's like got a play button design, so I think that's quite a neat idea for a case that's probably aimed at the gaming market. Let's get this tempered glass side panel off, which will probably look quite nice when the case is full of components. At the moment I imagine you're probably just getting a reflection of my living room. There's 4 screws to take it off. They're just sort of little metal thumb screws. Yeah, they came off pretty reasonably easily. So taking a look inside, the first thing I noticed is got this really big metal PSU shroud. It does look like it's got a couple of like rivets on here. I guess that's probably attaching the hard drive bay underneath, which makes it look not as nice as it could do, but it's also got like the GameMax branding as well, which is quite subtle actually, because I have seen some of the GameMax cases with like giant white lettering, so it definitely seems they've toned it down a little bit with this case, thankfully. In the back here, that's the extra RGB fan that does come in this case. It is like a halo RGB fan, so hopefully it'll look quite pretty when we've got some parts in here, and it does seem to be sort of higher quality than what you would normally get with a case at this price point. Normally you might just get like a plain black fan or just like a single LED RGB fan, but yeah, I think that is quite a neat addition. And then also at the back here, this is where you'll find the 7 PCIe expansion slots, and they do look like they are the ones that sort of like slip out as opposed to snap off, so that's definitely a thumbs up for me, as it makes building in it a little bit easier and safer as well, because there's not going to be any sharp edges. When it comes to cooling in this case, there is like a reasonable amount of options. It obviously comes with the one 120mm fan in the back, and then you can put 2 120mm fans in the roof or 2 140mm fans, and then the front will fit 3 120mm fans or 2 140mm fans. Of course that does mean there is also space for an all-in-one cooler, so you can have a 280mm all-in-one either in the front or the top of the case. And these sort of like vents and things, they do have dust filters. So the top dust filter, I'm honestly a little bit disappointed by the dust filters actually. The holes in them are quite big, so I'm not sure how well it is actually going to keep dust out, and also it doesn't feel like the best quality. The edges are quite sort of like sharp and unfinished, and also the magnet on this one is sort of only just hanging on there, but it's probably going to be better than nothing. And then you do get one underneath the power supply as well. It's a little bit awkward to get out. There we go. The same sort of thing down there. It's got magnets and things on, but like I said, they don't feel like the best, but they're probably going to do more than just having no dust filters anyway, so it's quite nice to see them, even though it is a more budget case. The cooling in general though, I am slightly worried about in this case. Obviously I can't say too much because I haven't tested it yet, but just looking at it, it doesn't seem like the best sort of layout. The front fans I think will definitely be a little bit choked for air because there is one single vent down the left hand side, and I'm not sure if that will provide enough airflow. The exhaust fans I don't think are going to have a problem because it's just straight up through the top of the case and straight out the back. It's just the front of the case is mostly plastic with only a small sort of slot for air to get through, and I think that does have a filter in as well, so that's obviously going to reduce airflow further. I think I'm just going to have to wait and see until I've done my testing, and then I'll find out whether the airflow is going to be an issue or not. So now I'm going to flip around the case and take off the rear side panel so we can take a look at what's going on back there. These thumb screws don't feel like the best. They are a little bit stiff and they feel like they're made of plastic, but I guess who's going to take their side panel on and off that often? Okay, here we go. So going around the back here is where you basically start to notice that is a bit of a budget case. From the outside, it has a lot of very nice flashy RGB lighting. It's got like tempered glass. So it definitely has a lot of features you'd expect to find on a more high-end case. But sort of like this chassis underneath does feel a little bit sort of like thin and slightly sort of, I don't want to say flimsy because obviously it is made out of metal, but it's not as sort of like thick high-end chassis you'd find on a case that's like £100 for instance. And there is also like some very unfinished edges. There's one of my sort of nitpicky things about cases. I don't like them when they've got sharp bits because obviously when you're building in it, that prevents like a hazard. And some of the screw holes for like the motherboard stand or some things are definitely a little bit sharp and unfinished, so I'm going to have to be a little bit careful when I'm building in it. Also, you'll notice that there isn't anywhere, there is a hard drive sort of cage, but there isn't any trays, and there's no trays for SSDs either. There's also no rubber grommets either to thread cables through, so you do definitely notice that it's sort of missing a few things in that aspect. It does support 2 3.5-inch drives and also 2 2.5-inch SSDs. I'm not sure where the SSDs are meant to go. There is some sort of labeling back here, so I'm assuming probably around the front. Maybe they go next to the motherboard. But I'll have to try and figure that out, I think. And then also the hard drives, you have to sort of screw directly onto the cage. So that'll be a bit interesting. I'm used to using trays, so we'll see how that goes. However, one of the good things about this case, something that I think definitely pushes the price up, is that it does have this like fan hub here. So that works with to control the RGB lighting, so if you're going to install any more of the Halo RGB fans, and also it will like connect to your motherboard. It does somewhere have the 3-pin RGB connector if you've got an RGB motherboard, I think. Yes, that one there. So 3-pin RGB connector, you'll obviously have to be a bit careful, make sure you've got the right motherboard for that. And it also comes with something that I'm quite looking forward to trying out actually. This like remote control here, it looks like you don't get a box or any instructions with this case. You do just get like a bag with the screws, but you do get like quite a cool controller for the RGB lighting and fans, so I'm looking forward to trying that out. Unfortunately though, this fan hub, RGB hub, is powered, whatever it is, by a Molex power connector, which I really don't like because I'm going to have to put an extra Molex cable in. So that's a little bit of a negative with this, but I think you do get quite a few features for your money, but unfortunately I think this case is a bit of a case of compromise, I guess. You're getting RGB lighting, tempered glass, and sort of like a fancy look, but when you sort of go behind the scenes, maybe the build quality isn't as good as other cases I've seen around this price point that maybe have less features. It's definitely going to be quite interesting to see what I find building in this case like. So through the power of editing, let's fast forward in time. I'll get some components in here, do all my temperature testing, and we'll find out how that goes. So I've now got all of my components in the GameMax Starlight case. Here is a full list of everything that I opted to use in this build. And what I can say is that it does look really, really pretty now. Obviously the RGB lighting strip at the front and the RGB fan in the back has lit up, and it does look a lot better. It's not just a plain boring box anymore. And I do quite like the lighting. It's nice and bright. I have got some very bright lights in front of me here, and it is shining out really brightly. The strip and the fan match nicely. They stay in sync, which is good. And also there is loads of different effects to choose between. So this little control that it comes with definitely does come in handy, because obviously there is no software to control the lights on this case. You have to do it all using the remote control. It has a pretty decent range. It's sort of about arm's length. Yeah, I am out of range now, but if I go in a bit closer, make sure it's in the right spot. There we go. So the lighting does change. You just got to make sure you're sort of in the right spot and at quite a short distance as well. But it definitely does come in handy. It has loads of different lighting effects to choose between, literally so many. And I definitely think one of the main sort of standout features on this case is the amount of customization it has when it comes to RGB lighting. You can sort of pause the different effects, and you can also change the speed and things using the controller as well. On the controller, there's also two buttons to adjust the fan speed. So there's a fan auto button and then one that just sort of changes the speed up and down as well. And I did actually install two extra fans in this case, right up in the front. GameMax sent me their Iceberg 240 all-in-one cooler, but I wanted to keep my case review components the same, so I used my normal air cooler, but I just sort of like borrowed the fans off of the all-in-one cooler because I thought, oh, they're like very similar sort of rainbow RGB halo fans from GameMax, so they're bound to work with their fan hub. But unfortunately, the fan hub only takes like the 6-pin RGB fans. It doesn't work with the PWM fans that are on their all-in-one cooler, which was slightly disappointing. So they are just sort of like doing their own thing in the front of the case. They don't sync up with the rest of the RGB lighting. And in general, I did find installing the fans on this case a little bit awkward. Like, it doesn't come with any paperwork. There's no manual whatsoever to give you any diagram or instructions on what to do. So I basically did what I would normally do in a case. I originally installed the fans on the inside, sort of pulling from the side where the motherboard is, but I sort of then saw there wasn't really enough clearance for where the SSD goes, so I was like, okay, well this isn't going to work. I wonder if they'll fit in the void in the front. So that's exactly what I did. I'm just going to rip the front of the case off. Okay, there we go. The front panel is quite difficult to get off. I was a little bit scared at first when I was building it. I was like, is this meant to come off? But I did actually get it off eventually, so I could install the two fans in the front here. So you can see that they are sort of behind this panel. There is an okay amount of clearance. So I did manage to fit those fans behind there, but if you are going to be trying to put an all-in-one cooler in the front, I don't think it's going to fit in this like sort of void in the front here. So you might have to rethink that one and maybe put it in the roof of the case instead. Also, I did mention when I was talking through the specifications, on the GameMax website it says that you can fit 3 120mm fans in the front. Obviously, that's not going to happen. That's definitely not going to happen. These are two 120mm fans, and there is like half a fan space at the top here, and down here is the hard drive bays, and there's nowhere to mount fans on those. So yeah, basically it means that the spec sheet is probably wrong on their website. I imagine they're probably going to edit it, but just to make you aware, it does only take 2 120mm fans in the front and not 3 like I originally said. Now we've seen the case in all of its glory, I'm going to take this side panel off so I can get rid of the reflection that's probably going on, because I know what these tempered glass panels are like. They look very, very nice when they're sat next to you on a desk in a dimly lit room, but all this bright lighting going on, it basically turns into a mirror. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. So when it came to putting the components in this case, the motherboard standoffs, not all of them came pre-installed. I did have to put 3 extra motherboard standoffs in. Fortunately, they were reasonably easy to install. They weren't too bad. I did use a bit of help with pliers just so I could get a bit of a grip on them, but then I did realise afterwards that in the little bag of screws you get, you do actually get the tool to put the motherboard stands into place, so I did miss that one, but they did go in pretty easily. When it came to putting in the motherboard, there is a decent amount of space to sort of manoeuvre into place. You've got a good amount of clearance at the top here to sort of get the 8-pin in, and I didn't really have any problems with the PCIe slots either at the back. When it came to installing my SSD up the front here, originally I did try put it in the space at the top of the case. So I managed to basically figure out that there is 4 screw holes sort of up the top here, and then there's like 4 screw holes down the bottom, and that's where the SSDs go. But the top screw holes, these sort of like phantom DVD drive bay holes. Obviously this chassis was probably is going to be used in like several different cases with like a different outer shell, and even though this case doesn't have space to put DVD drives, it still has the sort of holes in the back, and that basically means that the SSD doesn't fit flush onto that like back tray, so I couldn't get it to fit in the top slot, but fortunately it did fit quite nicely in the bottom slot, and it actually went onto the case really well, and because the slot underneath is lined up perfectly, there was loads of space to get my SATA power and SATA data cable into place. And I think it does look really neat, sort of nestled down the bottom there. I like having it on this side of the motherboard tray for sure. So now quickly spin this case around, we can take a look at what's going on behind the scenes, and we can all judge my cable management. Okay, let's get this off. Oh! Okay, so around the back here, the fan controller hub was actually attached by Velcro, which I did really like because it meant that I can sort of, you can pull it off while you're cable managing, and maybe, I think I took it off when I was attaching the SSD, and that definitely really helped because a lot of the time those controllers are sort of stuck on with like double-sided tape, and then if you pull them off you just get sticky mess everywhere. So I like that it was attached by Velcro. In general, the cable management around here I did find pretty awkward. I had an extra Molex cable to power the fan hub, which I don't like, and just there wasn't that much space. I actually originally had my cable management looking really nice. Even though this doesn't look too bad, I did actually have it like this 8-pin and the cable for the fan was like routed really nicely around here, and I had quite a neat little system going on. Unfortunately, because the clearance behind the motherboard tray is really narrow, I had like too much of a bundle of cables. I couldn't get the side panel back on, so I basically had to sort of like undo half of it and redo it, which pretty much sucked because you didn't want to have to redo cable management. And the whole point in cable management is to get the side panel to fit on nicely. So yeah, that was slightly annoying. Also, I don't really like the slit design because that makes it quite awkward to get the 24-pin into place. I prefer just to have a hole with like rubber grommets. I definitely did miss that, but it does mean that you've got a whole length of space there, so you can get the cable in like the precise place that you want it. It's just slightly awkward to sort of bend it round. There are actually quite a good amount of well-spaced holes to put. I put the fan through the top there, that's where my 8-pin went, and then you've got 2 holes in the PSG shroud to thread the front I/O cables up through, which I really liked. And also there's a good placement for when I powered the SSD, and I also connected the fans through the front here as well. Unfortunately though, there isn't as many good places to put cable ties through. So there's one up here, there is one behind here, but there wasn't any sort of like down here or across here. Like I definitely felt like I needed somewhere to thread a cable tie through that wasn't there, which is slightly frustrating when you found a good route but you just can't find anywhere to tie it down. Also, while I was cable managing it, I found that I had a bit of an issue with one of the front I/O cables. Even though I really like that they are coated in this black plastic, unfortunately I haven't actually plugged in one of the USB cables. It is behind here somewhere. Here we go, I'll pull it out. The problem I had with this cable is that it's just pretty rubbish. The connectors like inside, the little pins, or I don't know, like sockets for the pins, they're really like wobbly. So when you go to plug it into your motherboard, like they don't line up and the pins just don't slot in. And I was trying and trying and trying for ages and I couldn't get it to work and I didn't want to break my motherboard. So I just basically left it unplugged. That's okay for me because I'm just reviewing the case, but obviously if you're a consumer and you're having to actually use the case, you want to make use of the USB ports on the front of the case. That does suck slightly. It might just be that I've got a dodgy sample, or it could just be that the cable is not very good quality. So next up I'm going to talk about performance, because even though this case does look very pretty, there's obviously not much point if it doesn't keep the components cool. When it came to the noise levels, obviously I have added those extra couple of fans in the front, and the noise is going to depend on what sort of fans you use and how many fans you use and things, but in general I did find it to be quite a quiet case. When it was idle and I actually changed the fan profile to auto, that back fan often didn't even spin. So it keeps nice and quiet and nice and cool when everything's idle, and then also under load it doesn't even really get that loud either with the fans that I used. There wasn't really a problem with noise at all. So when it came to temperatures, there was no problem with the idle temperatures. Like I said, everything stayed nice and cool and quiet. The CPU sat at 34 and the GPU sat at 35 degrees. I then did my sort of like ADIS64 testing, and under maximum load I saw the CPU reach 58 and the GPU reach 77. So originally I was a little bit worried about this case because the front of the case, like the airflow doesn't seem that great, but it doesn't seem to have too many problems. Obviously the components I've got in here aren't really giant heat creating components, like they're not super powerful components that are going to chuck out loads of heat, but it's a budget case, so you're probably not going to be putting in components that are going to chuck out a load of heat. So yeah, I don't think there's going to be too much of a problem with cooling compared to other cases that I've tested that are around this price point and have similar features. It is about average. There's cases I've tested that are cooler, there's cases I've tested that are hotter. So yeah, I don't think cooling is really a problem in this case and does actually perform quite well for a budget case. So overall, this case is definitely a little bit of a strange one for me. It does look like a more expensive case, but you are actually only paying £65 for it, which means that it is slightly disappointing in some areas. I think once you've got the components in, once the side panels are on, everything's closed up, it's a very beautiful looking case, it has some good features, and the RGB lighting does work well. It's definitely a case of compromise. Like if you're someone that wants like a really well built case and you value build quality like above all else, this is not going to be the case for you. I don't think it's the people that GameMax are aiming this case at. It's a case that is made for people that want all the bells and whistles that you'll find on a more expensive case, so the RGB lighting, PSU shroud, lots of USB ports, fan filters and things, but maybe you don't want to pay that premium price tag, you want to get it at a more budget price, and therefore I think this is the case for you. You've got to sort of like weigh up your options and look at your budget and see what's most important to you. If you want lots of features, you want flashy RGB lighting, and you don't mind sacrificing a few things, then I think the GameMax Starlight is going to be a good option. If you like this video from KITGURU, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't been here before, where have you been? Welcome to our channel. Please hit that subscribe button and remember to hit the bell icon as well, and you'll get a notification every time a new video goes live, and then YouTube can't hide us from you.